I'm Joel Hauser. I am Director of Capital Grants with the Open Space Institute. We are a land conservation organization. I'm based here in Chattanooga. As Dr. Bridges pointed out, the issues of floods, flooding, natural disasters are very closely related with land and land use. And that's where my really drive comes from around these issues. We have a great panel for you all today. This is a very serious issue. We're 1 year and 5 days after Hurricane Helene. That really devastated, parts of, in addition to Florida and Georgia and these places that we typically associate with hurricane damage, it really tore through western North Carolina, East Tennessee, 20 inches of rain in Asheville. That was a storm that was supposed to come to Chattanooga. And that's why this topic is so important. We were spared that one in this region. And if you think about the flooding that we had a couple of weeks ago in East Ridge and East Brainerd, where I live, we got 6 inches of rain, and there were 300 homes flooded. So you can imagine if we got the 20 that came with Helene. I really just want to acknowledge that our panelists, they lived through this. They were impacted by this. This is a very emotional thing. It was life-changing. It was a life-changing event for the region. And so, I just really appreciate them being willing to come here and share their stories and lessons with us. And so on our panel today, we have Kit Kramer, who is the CEO of the third largest chamber in North Carolina with over 1,600 members and a $4.2 million annual budget. The organization serves as the lead economic development agency for Buncombe County and the city of Asheville. They provide a voice for businesses in all levels of government and serves members with professional development in connection to valuable resources such as economic development and research, business education, marketing opportunities, and advocacy. Welcome, Kit. Our second panelist is trained as an attorney and also a published author. Jay Lutzy has become a leading voice for state and federal conservation funding for investment in public lands. He is the senior board advisor for Asheville's Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy, one of the nation's most established land trusts. Welcome up, Jay. And finally, we have Dr. Andrew Joyner. He's an associate professor in the East Tennessee State University Department of Geosciences, the co-director of Geoinformatics and Disaster Science Lab, and the Tennessee State Climatologist, and founder of the Tennessee Climate Office. Welcome, Dr. Joyner.
A lot of people have said it's the worst flooding they've ever seen, and these are responders who have been in other disaster environments that are huge, other hurricane disasters, wildfire disasters, and for them to come here and say that this is the worst flooding they've ever seen, looking at why Helene was so bad in this area, it really leads to flash flooding in mountainous terrain, and there really wasn't as much water that fell on the Tennessee side, 5 to 7 inches or so of rain on our side, but 15, 20, 25 plus inches at the headwaters of the Pigeon, the Nolichucky, and the French Broad. And certainly in our area, the Nolichucky, being in the Nolichucky watershed, all of that rainwater that fell so quickly over the course of about 48 hours had to go somewhere. And it's the Nolichucky Dam area where the flow rate was more than twice that of Niagara Falls and well over what the previous record was in that location. We even lost our stream gauge at Embryville. I think it topped out at 19 feet, and they estimate that it probably reached about 30 feet in that area. A very, very rare and very extreme event. We've got high water marks, we can see the debris lines, and so of course the water came down, it came up very quickly and went back down very quickly. And so if you don't collect that data, you're going to lose that information on what the flood extent was. And drones, I mean, you can get in the sky so quickly, get a ton of data, tons of imagery, but you don't have to go into the major damage area. You can be at a distance. And so our drone operators can be safe, but really collect instant damage assessment imagery to provide I would say usable information to the Washington County Emergency Management Agency, the mayor's office, and anyone else, TEMA, anyone else who needs that information. We really enjoy interacting with the community, interacting with the state, and developing new tools and products to kind of address resilience, address changes in climate. Really like to be able to use our skills for good, and the early signs point to a lot of collaboration and a lot of strong work in the community, and it gives me a lot of hope.
So the title of our panel I should have mentioned. It is After the Storm, Lessons Learned from Hurricane Helene. And so we really want to harness through this panel and hope you all have questions at the end, really things that lessons that we can learn the easy way rather than the hard way as a region. We've heard some of those, we heard some of those from Dr. Bridges, but I really am interested, from our panel, and perhaps we go just down the line here with this one, who, in your words, who you are, what you do, and just the quick kind of experience that you all had during and after the storm, and we'll start with you, Kit.
I'm Kit Kramer. I'm the president of the Asheville Area Chamber of Commerce, and I've lived in Asheville for 15 years. Native Floridian, so I had some understanding of hurricanes, but we didn't expect it. We did not expect it. I've got 3 tubs at my house, and I filled one of them kind of haphazardly. We thought we were a climate refuge, and I had just 1 year before the storm moved out of downtown Asheville to Swannanoa, which was the location of our water system in the Swannanoa River, where our pipes got ripped up 25 feet below ground, and we were without water for 52 days, and it stunk. We were back in the Stone Ages pretty rapidly after that. So. And I've seen my role. We're a little bit, we each have different roles. And my role as a Chamber of Commerce president, I wanted to make sure that we tried to cleave to the business community, because I can tell you more about my philosophy. Joel probably told you about how emotional things are, because I'm telling you, I am sick of talking about this storm. So happy to talk about it. It's an important thing to talk about, but boy, am I glad the 1-year anniversary is over.
Jay Lutzy, and I'm with Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy, which is an Asheville-based land trust that was founded in Kingsport, Tennessee, and we were founded to protect the route of the Appalachian Trail through the Roan Highlands. So that's on the boundary of Carter County, Tennessee, and Avery County and Mitchell County in North Carolina. I live on the North Carolina side of the line, and if you're in land conservation, all these pieces of land look like opportunities to protect forests, protect water, protect species, protect wildlife connectivity using money. And when you see it wash away and you see it altered radically, it seems like an opportunity missed. A lot of the people that passed away in Western North Carolina died on their land inside a national forest proclamation boundary. So little of Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee and Pisgah National Forest and Nantahala National Forest in North Carolina are owned by the public. There's a big misconception about what public land is. And in the southeastern United States, or really the eastern United States, our public land units are very fragmented. And if we were doing a better job of actually protecting at least the land that's supposed to be protected, we would have had less loss of life. And that also, after the storm, looks like an opportunity in the conservation community to get right what the folks who created our national forest system and our national park system and trail systems anticipated as really good places to protect nature versus good places to have the built community. And we have a long way to go to get it right.
Andrew Joyner, I lead the Tennessee Climate Office. I'm the Tennessee State Climatologist. That office is at East Tennessee State University, which in this instant ended up being right in the middle of some of the biggest impacts in Tennessee. So normally during events such as Waverly several years ago, our job is a little more remote. It's to document that event, gather as much data as possible. Waverly ended up being the new 24-hour rainfall record, 20.73 inches. Previous record was 13.6 inches. Blew that one out of the water and really cataloged that, work with National Weather Service. So this was a really different event for us. With it being in our area and a lot of the flooding and the loss of life and impacts on property were just a few miles from ETSU. And so in the day of and the days and a couple of days after, we were tasked with actually helping with search and rescue, which is not something we had typically done before. We do have a number of drones that we typically just use for standard ortho mapping, just making new maps. And so we were using those drones for search and rescue, working with county and state emergency managers and others. And then after that period ended, we spent a lot of time with the drones mapping the infrastructure damage. So there were a lot of bridges that were impacted. So we mapped 8 between Greene and Washington County, 5 of which were completely destroyed, and you saw some of those in the video there. And then 2 that were severely damaged and passable, and 1 that was passable but had other issues with it. And so that was what we were doing in the next couple weeks. And then we also, at the same time, were trying to document as much data, as much information as possible. And we created a story map. And so we have a story map that's kind of a smaller version of what you may have seen from NOAA that was released about a week and a half ago. That's a fantastic story map. And so really cataloging that information, making it accessible, making it interactive so that people could see that. It's perishable data. And so really doing that part. And now, going on a year later, a large part of what we are doing is related to resilience and recovery. And so just last week, with it being the 1-year anniversary, there were tons of events led by long-term recovery groups. So we coordinated with those groups, and we're at resource events and really providing people with information on how do they access information for their own community, for their own home, and how do they act on that information. And so that's kind of where we are right now in our process.
Thanks so much. Kit, when we first spoke, we talked about the role of the chamber after the storm. It became a lifeline for the business community. What lessons did you learn about the role of businesses in disaster resilience, and how can chambers of commerce and businesses proactively prepare for future events?
I think I was telling these folks that we had just redone our business continuity plan and had focused it around angry protesters, because we thought that was going to be our biggest problem. And turns out, wasn't our biggest problem. We may still have those, but this has brought a whole new look at things. And in the initial days, we're in downtown Asheville. We got power back, but the cell phone coverage throughout the area was not available. So we were posting our Wi-Fi and putting up the information about the Wi-Fi so that people could contact their family members. We rapidly went from doing that to opening our whole building as an emergency center for everybody from the SBA, the SBTDC, our community colleges, the local community development funders, trying to provide all the resources that we could to businesses, as well as housing businesses that literally had lost their buildings. But at the same time, on a parallel path, we were being asked to do all kinds of different things. And I really worked hard to work connections and put people in the right places with people who had a natural affinity for the type of work that they were asking to be done. For example, it did not make sense to me for us to serve as a relief supply distribution area. That could be handled by a lot of other folks. Instead, for us, we were providing a place for businesses to come and begin rebuilding their businesses, in many cases, literally from the ground up. We were trying to source materials using our networks throughout the state and the country, and also beginning the drumbeat of advocacy. One of the things that one of my colleagues told me early on was that, Kit, there's no money for small businesses. There are no grants for small businesses in the wake of a disaster. And she said, you've got to have a capacity to raise money, accept donations because they will come, and you need to be advocating for those types of things because we're a small business community, and those small businesses are the lifeblood of our community. So that's where we focused our attention during that time period. But I mean, I was sourcing portable toilets because we had no water. We were working on trying to find oxygen in bottles for particular types of business. There were all kinds of things that just they appeared to be random, but would arrive at our place of business, and we major in connections and relationships. That's the thing we do really well. And so we knew people who knew people and could make connections and try and source materials. But we tried really hard to stay in our lane.
Yeah, I really appreciate the networking component of that because it's impossible to plan for the unimaginable, and that's what this is. And to that, Dr. Joyner, you've seen firsthand how data can drive life-saving decisions. What are the biggest gaps in our current climate assessments, and how are we working to close those?
I think specifically coming out of this event, it is really clear to a lot of people that we did not have enough stream gauge data and enough weather station data. And so, that's definitely on a local level. And there are ways that we're going about addressing that now. So tomorrow, I've actually got a meeting with Army Corps and with TEMA to discuss a river gauge project where we will be laying out where and how many and what type of stream gauges we need and where we need those. And how that can be part of this advanced flood early warning system that the state wants to build. And then another project that Helene was unfortunately a catalyst for that came to the state's attention actually after Waverly, because Waverly is another event where we really had a gap in understanding in real time the intensity of that rainfall event. I mean, for Waverly, you were getting 4 inches every hour for 3-4 straight hours. And so we really didn't have that real-time stream gauge or weather or rainfall intensity data for any of these events, but for Helene as well. And so the legislature this past session did pass support funding for a statewide mesonet, and so that's short for a mesoscale network of weather stations. So Tennessee is going to be the 42nd state in the country to have a mesonet. North Carolina has their mesonet, it's called an EcoNet. But unfortunately, a lot of their weather stations were not in places where we could have used that data upstream. And so as we deploy these gauges and these weather stations that are going to give us 1-minute, 5-minute rainfall intensities, we're going to be incorporating that into a system that gives us an extra 15, 20 minutes. So the rooftop there of the hospital in Irwin, a lot of resources were sent there to evacuate that. Ambulances, fire trucks that were all instantly pretty much inundated with floodwater. Had we known or had that information about the amount of rain or water coming down the Nolichucky, had that been known, then those resources probably wouldn't have been lost. That hospital could have been evacuated sooner. Very similar with the industrial area in Irwin, where many lives were lost. That's something that if we had this warning system in place, then we could have prevented that or at least reduced that impact. And so I'm a huge data nerd. I always have wanted more data and pushed for that. And it is really good that it looks like we're on the precipice of having a whole lot more weather and climate data. Now it's a matter of keeping the momentum and building useful products that are easy to use, easy to access, and building relationships with county emergency managers, with these long-term recovery groups, with mayors, with all of those folks, and people at the regional level too, like this meeting, where people find out about that information and learn how to use it. And that's a big part of what we're doing going forward to try to address that gap.
Yeah, that's great, and I appreciate the self-described data nerd, and I think there are a lot of those in the room here.
I'm in the right
I won't
place.
ask people to raise their hands. But how can communities, you mentioned these things are coming down the pipe, like what do they need to watch out for in order to engage with those and understand the data that they're getting?
I mean, I think it kind of starts on our side, is making sure people are aware of it. Like that these data are going to be available, or as you develop these data sets, don't hide them. Like make them as interactive and as usable as possible. And I'm definitely very deep in the GIS or Geographic Information Systems world. So interactive web maps, interactive tools, downloadable data. Anything that makes it easier and simpler for people to understand and use the information is really critical. And so that's going to be kind of our job at the moment, or as we roll these things out, working with TEMA, working with other agents, to make sure people at the county and the community level know about the information and to get feedback. Like, how would you want to interact with this? What kind of interface would you want in a product? One of the things that we're seeking some grant funding for are county-specific dashboards that would include new flood models, probably using Oak Ridge National Lab's Triton model, merged with FEMA's HAZUS economic loss model, to say, okay, the forecast for Helene was pretty good. The impacts from it were not well understood, or what could happen. And so if we know we're going to be getting 1,000-year or 500-year or whatever level rainfall, you would have a tab for a 500-year event with these types of models. You could have the FEMA flood models, which are older and need to be updated, but you could have other flood models in there, and you could see the different levels or different areas that might be at risk for this event. And you can plan for that hours or days in advance instead of basically in real time. And so making that very easy to use, very accessible, I think is really critical, kind of moving forward. And then keeping that data up to date. One of the biggest problems we have, I mentioned 500-year, 1,000-year, we hear these words. A lot of times they're based off of old data that really ended in 2000 for Tennessee. Most of our understanding of what a 100 or 500-year event is based on data from the late 20th century. And so hopefully before the end of the year, NOAA will be releasing a new data set that updates that through 2015. We call it Atlas 15. That's still not including the past 10 years. It will not include Waverly. It will not include Helene. And so those are things that we've got to continually update, because if we're designing for a 100-year event, but that's a late 20th century 100-year event, that may be a 50-year event now. And so those are things that we've got to keep updating and keep public awareness on.
Yeah, that's right. And the fact of the matter is we already have a lot of people in harm's way. And so these warning systems are so critical, and as much advance notice as we can have. Jay, pivoting to you, in the effort to keep people out of harm's way, what is the role of Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy? What do you all do, and how did this storm perhaps shape the way that you're thinking about these issues?
We started out just protecting rare plants. Like, are there rare plants on this mountain? Let's buy the piece of land and add it to the national forest. Or let's create a state park here because there's really good water quality. We followed the data to that extent and then tried to connect human communities to it. As this organization has matured, we're in our 50th year. We've protected 103,000 acres of land. We've realized that we have to move down the slope from where all the rare plants are to where the people live, where the communities are, and then connect people to nature so that they will become advocates for it and they're not going to advocate for it if they don't use it and don't see it delivering ecosystem services, for example, or health and wellness, or spiritual wellness. The park behind you or the Forest Service tract on the mountain above you, we now know, more so than ever before, what it can deliver. In some places, it delivered landslides. North Carolina was doing a great job of mapping landslide hazards until 2013. And I sat on the Mountain Resources Commission where we were cataloging with partners where the soils might subside and lead to landslides. And members of our legislature fought against that with the help of the realtors, eliminated the Mountain Resources Commission so we would not know where the hazards were. Because they said, if we know where the hazards are, then people can't get insurance there, or developers won't build there. Please don't do that in your region. That was the dumbest thing that I have witnessed happen firsthand in our region, is choose blindness of where people might be in harm's way. So we in the conservation community are really good at looking at maps, realizing where habitat connectivity and where water moves and where that's good aquatic habitat, where to protect it. Those are really good places, as I say, to have land conservation and water conservation, and sometimes aren't great places for people to live. So I really enjoyed the prior presentation where there's a full discussion of what happens. Those maps were compelling about what certain landscapes looked like in the 1800s versus what they look like now, and we are putting people in harm's way. Conservation does provide a toolkit for avoiding some of those predictable events in the future. If we can look at trend lines and try to get ahead of them, there's some really good places for parks and greenways that might not make good places for neighborhoods.
Thanks. And Kit, it really struck me when we first talked and then today, the idea of 52 days without water. I can't imagine. I keep a few gallons at home and a few more since we talked and I thought about it. But how did that experience kind of reshape your understanding of infrastructure vulnerabilities, and what kinds of investments and partnerships do you now see as essential?
I mean, and it's not just water that we need infrastructure built around. I mean, the lack of cell phone coverage, and that was related to lack of electricity, but it was also related to the amount of our beautiful tree canopy and the amount of trees that came down, which then prevented people from getting to our power poles and things of that nature. But not having water is just a huge thing. Here we were at downtown Asheville. If you come visit us, and I encourage you to do that and bring your money, and please spend it liberally, because we missed all of last fall's season. There were hotels there that were putting up first responders and people who had been displaced from homes with no water, which means you can't flush toilets. It means you can't cook. You can't clean yourself if you've been out saving people's lives or trying to clear debris to get to people. And I mean, I was viscerally reminded of that. My husband and I would go out and I would be going to town on mud, clay, mud everywhere at our house. We had a couple of trees down on the house, broke the driveway. We were so lucky compared to other people, it's not even funny. And then I'd come back in and think, now what do I do? Because I am covered with this stuff. So we were hauling every pan we had down to ditches that were running like creeks at that point and filling up pots. And so were our neighbors. I mean, we were all doing that type of thing. And when I think about the businesses who were, the restaurants that were opening their larders, they had no power, so they were taking all their food out, and we have all these people converging on us to help. So they're feeding people, but they have no water to wash anything with. Finding bulk water was a whole different thing. So another lane that we have clearly played in is one of advocacy. and getting the message out and working collaboratively with the whole of Western North Carolina to talk about what the needs were, especially around infrastructure. We have so many private bridges and private roads that separated people from their homes. It's just the amount of infrastructure has been amazing. And I've served on, a North Carolina Chamber Energy Vision for the Future, which has given me nightmares to think about in the past, pre-Helene, about what the needs are. And then to think about that, to think about the water system itself and the importance. I mean, we're now living in fear of just a bad tropical storm. The word turbidity may be a normal word in y'all's lexicon. It's one that we have all we've had to accommodate to understand, because turbidity levels of the water were going to be key to whether or not it could run through a filter system and not ruin the rest of the system and allow us to have non-potable water back, which meant an ability to just flush a toilet. That was a red letter day, was it not? We were happy about that because everybody's hauling buckets to flush toilets or to find, we probably, the sheer amount of plastic from plastic jugs of bottles of water. I mean, people are using individual bottles of water for cooking and cleaning. I mean, it was just unbelievable. So we have a whole new appreciation. We've always been big on infrastructure, but there's a tendency for that to be around roads. Let's get I-26 finished in the Asheville area where it comes down to one lane. I know the whole region would like for that to happen. And we've been working on it as a Chamber of Commerce for over 30 years. And we're about to get there. But now we've got a whole different set. It has shifted priorities for the type of infrastructure that we need to invest in. And we're all vitally interested on how, when we receive relief funding for various forms of infrastructure, when we finally get it in our hot little hands, how it's going to be spent and how it's going to be prioritized.
Yeah, that's so hard to think about, and so much of that infrastructure, so even if the homes aren't in harm's way, a lot of the infrastructure is the water treatment plants, the sewage treatment plants, and that's something that we've kind of seen time and time again. And Jay, you all have worked on buyouts and seen the damage that is concentrated near the rivers. What policy or land use strategies do you believe could reduce the future risk?
So some very controversial ones would be very helpful. When I was a kid, just starting out in conservation, there was a big effort in Western North Carolina to have 30-foot stream buffers. No brainer. Of course you would want 30-foot stream buffers. What if the rivers come up and people get killed by the floodwaters? Well, that was shot down in a way that no one will revisit it again for a generation. Politically unpopular to have 30-foot stream buffers on our creeks and rivers. Reason being, we live in a very fragmented landscape, and so if you only own an acre and 30 feet of the river is in a no-build zone, you might only have a tiny postage stamp of your property that's still buildable, and so opponents claimed that that was a taking. Under the Constitution, you have to be compensated for that taking, even though you weren't actually taking anything. You were taking a use away. So I like to say that there is inexpensive regulation that you could use collaboratively with local communities. That is not going to happen in Appalachia. I don't know about on this side of the mountain, but that's not going to happen in Western North Carolina. And that's the cheapest way to get rational planning. In the absence of that, people are rushing to rebuild next to the North Toe River near my house right now. And the political climate is such that people are saying we can't stand in the way of anybody rebuilding immediately right where they were. And some of them are not houses. Some of that is campgrounds, which is the livelihood of people. I understand, I get it. We're going to be cleaning those trailers, those camper homes out of rivers after the next event. I guarantee it, and we are all going to pay for it. And everybody stepped up in this storm event, and everybody pitched in, and everybody around the country and the world came to help Western North Carolina and East Tennessee, and it was great. I don't think that's going to happen again. If it is sooner than 20 years out where people have forgotten, we don't have the wherewithal financially in this country and in this region to do this again. It was heroic what happened. We don't have it now. If it happened right now, we're sucking wind right now. A lot of pledges of funding from the Congress and from the state. The money has not arrived. And the next event, which we thought might have been last week, we were all braced during a tropical depression that was headed our way. And so there's so many amazing stories, and I'm inspired being on this panel. I really am, and being in this room. But I am terrified about what happens in the next storm, because we are already making mistakes that we had not been punished for some years, and we're now being punished for our mistakes. And I wish we weren't continuing to make them.
Please.
Well, and from a Chamber of Commerce, I hope it was not your local Chamber of Commerce that was fighting against the 30-foot buffers. No. But anyway, because property rights are a big deal in the mountains and everywhere, frankly. They're just a big deal. And now we're dealing with, so what happens when you've got this urban fabric, highly pedestrian area, a place has been flooded out, and the owners decide they're going to take the FEMA buyout, and nothing can be rebuilt on that land that isn't going to allow the water to flow right through it. So all of a sudden you've got, like a missing front tooth in some cases. Not to say that that's the wrong decision of the owner. It's not our place to decide what that decision is, but it creates a whole different set of issues for areas that depend upon pedestrian traffic and a concentration of business. So we're currently trying to figure out how things look now, how you go back and retool and reuse and make those areas where literally the land was eaten away from around businesses in Swannanoa. You can't, it's gone and it's not coming back. And all the vegetation and trees that were there, gone. So FEMA gives it back to the county. Then what happens? Who repopulates those trees that, is it riparian or riparian zone?
It's whatever you want to call it.
Okay. Well, I say riparian. I didn't know what that meant either, oh, by the way, before this event, but I now understand the importance. And I think it's important from an economic development perspective that we all understand those types of things and the importance of the preventative nature of a riparian zone for those businesses and homes that do remain and are not necessarily directly on the banks of a river. So it's just created a whole different set of issues for us, but it's making us think about economic development very differently.
Yeah, that's right. And I spent a lot of time in Hot Springs, North Carolina after the storm. I have family there. And, I was really struck by, how the community pulled together. And they were cut off from their emergency services, so no police, fire, no ambulances, no water, cell phones, internet. And it's really hard as a community not to, we're rebuilding, we're strong, we're going to do this. And so it's a really tough situation and trying to get back to where we were. Dr. Joyner, in our initial meeting, you mentioned that your quote was, you're more vulnerable than you think you are. What does that mean for communities that haven't faced a major event like this? And how can they start building resilience now? And are there certain plans they should consider creating, or what can first steps look like?
There's a lot in that area. I like that you mentioned the 20-year horizon for forgetting kind of about what happened. We're at the 20-year anniversary of Katrina as well. That was a really big one. I don't feel like that one's going to be forgotten as quickly. And that actually, Katrina informed me a lot. I was at LSU during that time. And so it's a big part of why I'm interested in disasters and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, there's a lot in that space that we can work on. We have the tools It's a matter of trying to use those tools and using that data to make some of those decisions. I think that a lot of what I do relates, a lot of the grant funding that we get in the Climate Office centers around hazard mitigation planning. And so for those of y'all less familiar with that, every state, every county is supposed to have a FEMA-approved hazard mitigation plan. This is supposed to profile the hazards, the natural hazards that can impact your area, and then include a risk assessment and a vulnerability assessment and a list of mitigation strategies. If it floods here consistently, if this is a repetitive loss property, we should buy it. It may be recommended to buy it back. But you're right, there's a lot of issues with that. People don't want to give up their property. It causes fragmentation. There's a lot of pushback on that. But then there's also other things. Maybe in this neighborhood we need a culvert that's twice the size of what it is, and that can help. The nature-based solutions that were mentioned earlier, if you've not been to Johnson City lately, and it was even mentioned during Senator Corker's presentation, it has changed a whole lot in the past 10, 15 years. And a lot of that has been because of forward-thinking nature-based solutions that involve stormwater mitigation and developing several parks in downtown Johnson City that instead of every modest thunderstorm flooding half of the buildings down there, now you've got 3 different storm detention parks that are 99% of the time used for music and festivals and all these other things that bring the community together. They have artwork throughout the park. I know that's been a big thing today as well. So a lot of people were involved in that. It involved a tax, a stormwater tax. But I think those types of taxes where people see exactly how they're used and the value of that and the return on investment at the local level is where the impact can be made. And so the economy of Johnson City, the downtown area, is completely different now because of those investments. And those are the types of things that you can identify in the hazard mitigation planning process. And it's a process that's often overlooked. These plans are required, I mentioned this earlier, they're required at the state and county level because certain types of post-disaster funds are tied into you having that FEMA-approved plan. You can't have or have access to certain types of post-disaster funds without that approved plan. However, because of that, people rush through the planning process. They may hire an outside group. They may not really view this as a holistic planning process. They check the box, they put it away on a shelf, and they don't look at it until 5 years later when they have to update it. And so it's really kind of useless at that point. And so I am a huge advocate of making those hazard mitigation plans a much bigger part of your community, your local community, your county, and your state planning process when you're making some of these hard decisions, impossible decisions, in some cases about what project do you do next? Are there regulations, are there rules that people would accept that could help this community or could help the state? But you've got to think through those. You've got to do that planning process to do that. So I think that's a really good place to start is just simply highlighting the importance of mitigation plans and getting involved in that planning process and really getting a lot more involvement from the county and state emergency management agencies on that process.
Great. So we're getting the 5-minute warning. So I would love to open this up for audience questions to our panelists. If not, I have plenty more.
I live in a community that tries to, it's not this community that you're discussing, but where there's a great appreciation for the natural world, but it's also, and my parents, I inherited it from my parents, and it's in Pisgah National Forest. Do we want to have houses throughout our national forest system and have Swiss cheese? My neighbors are really conscientious, and our road held up at the top where I live. At the bottom, a landslide took it out. I had to walk to my house for 3 weeks, a mile and a half after the storm. And then when I got to my house, of course, there's no water and there's no electricity for a couple of months. And then the day they turned the power back on, they set the mountain on fire. So the hazards keep coming, even when you're trying to do the right thing. and I live in a community of like-minded do-gooders who are all members of their local land trust, which is great. But the Asheville community, I love how you mentioned we think we're resilient already. We thought we're supposed to be the poster child in the Southern Appalachian Mountains as a whole. This region is supposed to be climate resilient. It's supposed to be a refuge from climate change. We know this is where plants and animals are migrating to out of lower elevation areas that are getting too hot. And people are coming here more, so the pressure, not just squirrels and amphibians, but people too are moving into the region more. So places that seem resilient are also probably at more risk than they realize, and we're all just one wind gust away from learning that we're not as resilient as we thought we were. Where the water didn't get some communities, the blowdowns did. And some people who had done everything right were heavily impacted, unfortunately, because it rained for the 4 days before the storm, and so trees were going down everywhere. They might not have in that amount of wind had it not been so wet prior. So I think we just feel overwhelmed by the crisscrossing hazards that are coming our ways, and I tend to feel that communities that dodged a bullet just dodged a bullet.
I'm not familiar with that particular story. I was interviewed by NPR a couple of different times, and we were talking about some of the really terrible areas. So I worry about wildfires now when I haven't previously worried about that. It looks right behind my house looks like a giant set of fireplace with full-grown trees, and I'm one individual in a whole sea. I mean, you can't get. I was told by the folks who came in to do mitigation that it would take a fire road and equipment that we just can't get to it.
I mean, I definitely think this flood warning system that we're talking about can have a big impact on people, you know, getting people and maybe some mobile infrastructure out of the way. But specifically, I think the hospital, maybe that's a good example. That hospital in Irwin was built about 1 foot above what was considered the 100-year floodplain. I mean, this is an area that had flooded before in 1976, I believe. Probably an area that flooded in 1916 that was mentioned, I think, in the previous presentation. There was 2 back-to-back hurricanes in July of 1916 that caused similar flooding in Asheville and similar flooding. And so I think that in those situations where you have very limited area to build, because if you build up in the mountains or further up, then you're going to be vulnerable to landslides. There's really not as much buildable land in some of these very mountainous communities. That hospital, if it's built there again, there's an opportunity to elevate it like you see along the coast, where floodwaters would just rush through there, cause minimal damage, and then you go back to kind of business as usual. And so I think things like that in the built environment are ways to maybe address that. At the same time, sure, trying to avoid building, certainly avoiding new building, in vulnerable locations, but you have to understand what's vulnerable too, and so that gets back to the mitigation planning process and doing that holistically and with a lot of community involvement, because there's all these areas that are vulnerable that aren't mapped as floodable. So I think it's kind of involves several things that kind of cross between, flood warning, more data, but also some changes to the built environment and certainly some building code or regulations and rules that people are resistant to. And so getting community buy-in on what that looks like and why that's important to them. They don't want to be told nobody wants to be told what to do. But if you explain like why some things are important, some people come around on that and you can make that can make effective decision making.
So I just want to extend my most heartfelt thanks to our 3 panelists today. This is a very difficult topic and
we have all learned from you all, and just thank you all so much for coming and for sharing.
Visit Asheville and spend money.